Looking for the best free DAW software for music production? If you are just starting out, you don't want to pay hundreds of dollars for expensive DAW software. So a free DAW. But what is the best free DAW software for music production? I've spent days registering, being spammed, downloading, installing, learned the basics of 15 free DAWs and testing them all so you don't have to. In this video, I'm gonna take a look at 15 free DAWs for music production. I'll show them to you, and at the end of the video, I'll share with you my thoughts about which one I think is the best free DAW software for music production. The table of contents you can find in the description below. My first free DAW on this list is Audiotool. Audiotool is a DAW that you can use entirely online in your internet browser. So if you have an unstable internet connection like me, that's super annoying. When I registered the software, it kept saying that I needed to activate my account. This was after clicking the registration link in the email. Next, I tried to run the software and I got an error message that Safari wasn't supported. So I tried Chrome and finally it worked. Well, for 5 minutes, then it crashed. I disabled all the browser plugins as Audiotool suggested, but it crashed again and crashed again. So eventually I gave up. From what I noticed is that this DAW is really resource intensive. I couldn't run it properly on my computer. Cracks and pops galore. And with the screen recording, it's even worse. When we look at the screen, the plugins and samples you can find on the right side. The transport controls and BPM are on the top. In the middle is the plugin viewer. On the bottom is the timeline and the piano roll. You need a big screen for this DAW. A small screen is not gonna be convenient. The software is node-based. You connect plugins via wires, so you have to wire the sampler to a mixer, which you have to create, and then to the master chain in order to get your sound. I noticed that you are zooming in and out of the plugin workspace a lot, and the workspace gets cluttered quickly with just a couple of tracks. You can automate tracks with Audiotool, and you can use your own samples with Audiotool. I tried to connect my MIDI keyboard and that worked just fine. As far as I could see, there is no limitation in the number of tracks. I could not find out how to save, bounce or export your file to your hard disk. I could not find out how to configure your sound card, change bit rates or inputs for example, and I couldn't find out how to use third-party plugins. But there are synthesizers and samplers with step sequences in the software, and at this point I gave up because it crashed again. For a browser-based application it can do a lot, but for a DAW it has some major limitations. Let's take a look at another free DAW in the browser, Bandlab. The second browser DAW is a much more straightforward DAW, but it works only in Chrome and there is a version for your phone. I like the design of the software. It's super clean and super uncluttered. The transport controls are on the top, the timeline with the tracks in the middle and the piano roll on the bottom. And all the plugins are, just like Ableton Live, displayed on the bottom. As far as I could see, there is no limit in the number of tracks you can use. One of the first things that I noticed is the cracks and pops with just one MIDI track. So also this free browser DAW is pretty resource intensive. Downloading stems and exporting your mix down works even in MP3, but importing AIFF files from my Kashmir sample pack was problematic. You can export MIDI regions as MIDI and WAV, and connecting my MIDI keyboard worked just fine. You can drag and drop samples from your computer straight into the timeline. And you can also record straight from your sound card. The step sequencer is really nice, but I can't find out how to replace the stock samples in the sequencer. A really nice feature in Bandlab is pitch shifting and stretching audio. You can tempo analyze audio, but you can't change your sample from 128 BPM for example to 126. Yes, you can pitch up or down or speed it up in a percentage, but not based on a BPM. The DAW lacks support for VST and other plugin types, and with the limited amount of things you can set for the synthesizers, for example, I couldn't find out how to change the attack, sustain, decay and release, you are definitely missing features. I'm also missing a proper mixer. I'm impressed what they've done with the web application, but DAW-wise, not so much. I love that you can start with Bandlab and immediately understand how things work, so absolutely credits for the usability. You can store unlimited projects, unlimited collaborations, there are royalty-free loops, virtual instruments and effect plugins in the software. I think there's a big potential in this piece of software, but it hasn't matured yet. For the beginner it would be nice to start with, because you have only the basic features. But for the advanced producer, don't ditch a DAW, yet. When you want to produce on the road, an online free DAW is, well, really not a viable option. First of all, you need a stable internet connection with a lot of bandwidth, and it's someone else's computer. And if those companies go bankrupt or they decide to charge you money tomorrow, they can. Also, you can't use your own plugins. You are bound to whatever they provide. And that's maybe not enough. Also, the amount of system resources it takes, and no way to change your sample rates of your sound card, for example. Let's take a look at some offline DAWs then. Before we go any further, I want to mention Pro Tools first. Pro Tools is the DAW that is used in professional recording studios. There is a free version called Pro Tools First. With only 16 tracks, no third-party plugin support, and with only 3 projects you can save, it's more a trial version than a free DAW. I don't think that Pro Tools is particularly good for beginners, even the paid version, but I wanted to be in here because it's the industry standard. Next up on my free DAW software for music production list is Ohm Studio. Ohm Studio is free for Mac and Windows, but it has severe limitations. For example, you need to have a working internet connection, although the software is installed on your computer. No internet connection, you can't start the software. You also have to save in the cloud, and you can only save up until a maximum of 10 projects for free. And if you want to record in 24-bit and export to WAV, you need Ohm Studio Pro. The application is responsive, has no track limitations, and you can use third-party plugins. Well, you must use third-party plugins because there are no stock instruments in the software. Soundbridge for Mac and Windows. But how free is this free DAW software for music production? Soundbridge is available for Mac and Windows. The Soundbridge DAW is free if you donate, as this next screen carefully explains. File saving and opening are on the bottom, as are the transport controls. The plugins you can find on the left, and you can drag and drop them on a track. Which plugins are applied to a track you can find on the right. Also, the sample browser is on the left, and you can drag and drop samples directly to your track. The mixer is on the bottom, but also it's possible to have a huge mixer in the middle. The Soundbridge DAW is pretty straightforward, and I think you'll pick up very quickly. The software is responsive and you can change bit rates of sound card inputs, although it's very basic. To save CPU you can freeze a track, but freezing a track is a bit cumbersome in Soundbridge. You have to set the settings explicitly and select your tracks from a long list every time you freeze. It could be improved, but it's workable. Automation is also a bit cumbersome. You have to draw in an automation lane on an existing automation lane and change the values in the lower editor. You can't click the points directly on the timeline. Audio stretching and pitch shifting is very easy in the edit window, if Soundbridge doesn't crash. And making fade in and out points of a sample is pretty handy. You have an unlimited number of tracks and you can use your own plugins. There are also stock effect plugins in the DAW, but I couldn't find any instrument plugins. My MIDI keyboard was automatically detected and I had it working in no time. If you wondered if sidechaining is possible, yes it is. Sidechaining is using the output of one track for a plugin like a compressor, for example to achieve a pumping effect in electronic music. So nothing is standing in your way to make your first hit with Soundbridge. All in all, this DAW is pretty complete and has enough features to get you started and even grow as a music producer. Definitely check this one out. Before I go on to the next free DAW, I want to know what is your favorite free DAW. Let me know in the comments with the hashtag musicproducer. I saw videos on YouTube that say that Ardour is free. But judging by their website, it's not. It's cheap, but it's not free. So skipping to the next one, T7. T7 is free, but of course they like you to upgrade to their paid version of the DAW called Waveform for $70. T7 is available for Mac, Windows and Linux. You are greeted with a nag screen. If you click unlock and enter your user credentials, you can continue. The first thing that you'll probably notice is the one screen layout. Everything is in one screen except the plugins. With the tab sheets on the top you can easily switch between different projects and the settings, for example. On the left you can find the sample browser, from which you can drag samples and MIDI files directly onto your timeline. The file Save and Open is on the bottom left corner and the transport controls are on the bottom right. The tracks are in the middle and the track headers on the left. No, right. No, left. No, it's right. The piano roll is displayed on the track itself. It's worth mentioning that the DAW makes no distinction between audio and MIDI tracks. There's no limitation in the number of tracks in T7, and yes, you can use third-party plugins. You can even add a video for scoring film music. My MIDI controller works in T7, although it was a bit counterintuitive to configure, but okay, luckily you only have to do it once. Automation is also available in T7, although the cursor doesn't really make clear that you can drag the points. And I have to mention that it can do curved automation, which is a feature I don't see often in many DAWs. Because decibels are exponential and not linear, this is especially handy for volume automation. There are a couple of stock plugins in T7, like a sampler and a couple of effects like a compressor. Some things I found rather counterintuitive. It took me a while to figure out that scrolling up and down zooms your timeline in and out, but inside a MIDI clip it scrolls. And scrolling on the track header does an actual scroll of the timeline. Also, adding plugins you do via right-clicking on the track header. And the menu that appears for that sometimes appears somewhere else on the screen. And the lack of contrast doesn't help. When you find the menu, they make no difference in effect and instrument plugins in the list. So if you have a big amount of plugins, good luck. The software sometimes doesn't respond to mouse clicks, and sometimes a right click on a plugin opens a menu and sometimes the plugin. And I also had it crash on me once by adding a plugin. I also have to mention sidechaining in T7 because it's super easy, something that professional DAWs could take a lesson from. All in all, it's functional, it's complete and it's free, but it doesn't suit my idea of a DAW very well and it has some user interface issues. Garageband. Garageband is free when you own a Mac and you can download it from the App Store. I can find my way around Garageband pretty easily because I'm familiar with its big brother Logic. I suspect that Garageband under the hood is just Logic but with a simpler user interface. So I may be a bit biased when it comes to usability. On the left side you have some stock instruments. On the right side Apple loops and the handicapped file browser. In the middle are your tracks and on the bottom the plugins. This is also the place where you tweak the controls of the stock plugins. The application has a number of limitations. The first one, of course, the fact that it only works on a Mac. But the major one is the limitation of 32 tracks. And you can only add 4 effect plugins per track. You can get away with 32 tracks if you use your tracks wisely. Also, the 4 effect plugins is workable, but it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room. I'm also missing a proper file browser, because you can only use Apple's own sounds. You can't use, for example, a user-appointed directory, but luckily you can drag and drop samples from Finder. It would have been nice if they have included a sampler, and it would have been nice if you could tweak more parameters of your stock plugins. There is no mixer at the bottom like in Logic. Instead, there are a couple of simple buttons there. Luckily, it's possible to record and export 24-bit WAV files, but freezing a track, for example, I couldn't find. My MIDI controller works and I can use my external audio unit instrument and effect plugins. Yes! You can get pretty far with Garageband as a free DAW, but there will come a time that you definitely need to upgrade to Logic. Logic is only €200 for a fully functional professional DAW and it can read your Garageband files. Definitely check Garageband out if you own a Mac. By the way, there's even a Garageband app for your iPhone and for your iPad. My next free DAW on the list is Cakewalk. Cakewalk was previously known as Sonar, something to do with the takeover. Bandlab, the new owner, makes the previously discussed online DAW Bandlab. Because it's a Windows application, I can't test it for you, regretfully. Judging by the scarce information on the website is that it's completely free without any limitation on tracks or whatever, and I saw it supports VST plugins. I guess you have to download it to figure out what it does and doesn't do. The next free DAW that I want to take a look at is Studio One Prime. Studio One Prime is a stripped down version of the paid version of Studio One Pro. Since I own a license of Studio One Pro, I'm a little bit hesitant that it will interfere with my license, so I didn't install it. The footage I'm going to show you is a screen recording of Studio One Pro. The paid version of Studio One is my preferred DAW of choice, and out of familiarity it's for me really easy to say that it's therefore the right choice, but I'm not going to do that. Because the Prime version has some major downsides. The first one is obviously the lack of third-party plugin support, and you are stuck with the stock plugins. The stock plugins are by no means bad, but the only instrument plugin is Presence, which is limited. And you can add the MIDI synth if you pay for it, but there are no samplers included. No proper compressor and no way to add those yourself. That means that the DAW is pretty handicapped. The other obvious limitation is the limited amount of buses, but that's maybe less of an issue when you are starting out. There are loops and sounds bundled with Studio One Prime, so you can get started very quickly. Let's talk about the user interface. The interface is far from uncluttered and it can be pretty intimidating at the first glance. I know. On the left side we have the track overview, handy for a quick overview and hiding tracks, and the property viewer. The tracks are in the middle and the mixer, audio editor and the piano roll are on the bottom. On the right side we have the plugins, so the instrument and the effect plugins, and the sample browser. And on the bottom we have the transport controls. In my videos about the best computer to buy for music production, people ask me over and over why I recommend at least a 15-inch screen for music production. This is why, because a 13-inch screen is not really convenient, especially not for Studio One. What I like about Studio One is that you can search for plugins and sounds and drag and drop them onto your timeline. There is no track limit or storage limitations in the free version. With the professional version you can use ARA, VST and audio unit plugins and a slew of pretty good stock plugins. Studio One Artist is €100, which has more features than the free version, and the full version, Studio One Pro, is €400. By the way, subscribe if you like the content so far and hit that little bell icon so you don't miss any new video about music production. The next free DAW in this video is LMMS. LMMS, or Linux Multimedia Studio, is available for Linux, Windows and Mac. LMMS supposedly took inspiration from FL Studio and should be easy to understand when you are switching from that platform. However, I don't know FL Studio, so I can't say for sure, and I was struggling quite a bit to get started. I needed at least 6 or 7 tutorials. Downloading and installing the software without registration was a breeze. Starting the software, however, I had more luck on my laptop. The samples and instrument plugins you can find on the left in LMMS. Also the presets for the instrument plugins you can find here. Effect plugins you can add to the instrument effects chain in the plugin window. The rest is a window within a window. So the timeline is a window called the song editor. There's a separate window for the mixer and there is a separate window for the piano roll. And there is a separate window for the step sequencer. Step sequencer parts in the song editor are coupled to the step sequencer window. The same for the MIDI notes in the piano roll window. The multiple window interface doesn't work well for me. I'm constantly dragging windows out of the way and closing them, and that's especially time consuming on a small 13-inch laptop screen with a trackpad. It's possible to do sidechaining, but it's a bit cumbersome by sending it to an effects channel that you have to connect to a controller and rename that controller if you find it later, or am I missing something here? Automation is also possible in LMMS. You have to add an automation lane and an automation block on the timeline. Open the automation window and drag and drop a knob from your synthesizer or so to the window. That dragging and dropping the knob I like, otherwise I have to search for a parameter in a long list. I've noticed some user interface issues with LMMS, like not updating the user interface while playing, or the fight of being the on top of everything window when the automation window is open. You can't open other software, it is immediately pushed to the background. And hints like use Control and drag and use the middle mouse button are meant for Linux and Windows, but do not apply for Mac users. That is confusing to say the least. By the lack of knowledge of the My Documents folder and the Music folder, or not saving to the last folder you used, or not being able to scroll horizontally in the file browser, you see the non-optimized multi-platform nature of the software. Or the fact that horizontal and vertical scrolling applies to the whole workspace, instead of only the song editor. That is unnecessary time consuming. MIDI keyboards are supported and supposed to work in LMMS, although I couldn't get mine to work. LMMS can export WAV and OGG lossless file formats, and it can export stems, so multiple tracks at once. WAV, AIFF and FLAG for importing is supported, but regretfully MP3 is not. The software supports partial VST plugin support under Windows and supports the Linux Audio Developers Simple Plugin API, or LADSPA for short. That results in a slew of really simple plugins in the software with limited functionality. Since using your own VSTs or AUs won't work, you have to rely on what they provide for you. One thing I definitely have to point out is the lack of recording features. You can get around that by using Audacity, for example, but that makes LMMS not a one-stop free DAW. The professional music producer in the end will miss some features like transient detection, for example. But the tool is okay, besides the user interface issues. It has more features than most free DAWs out there, and LMMS has no limitations when it comes to the number of tracks. But the lack of support for VST plugins and my MIDI controller issues is a deal breaker for me. So I don't think it's the best free DAW if you are a beginner. For the Linux enthusiasts out there, you can take a look at QTractor. I have no usable Linux workstation, so I have to go by the tutorials and the screenshots on the internet. QTractor has recording capabilities in contrast to LMMS, even multi-take recording. It has unlimited tracks, unlimited buses, unlimited number of plugins per track, a piano roll, support for MIDI keyboards and automation possibilities. There is VST instrument support in QTractor, but no support for VST effect plugins. It reads MP3s and supports OGG, WAV, FLAG and AIFF files for reading and saving. Another free DAW for Linux is Rosegarden. Rosegarden is mainly a MIDI sequencer. meaning that it was first built as a program to make music with notes and sheet music. Later they added audio support, but I suspect the support to be very minimal, although it supports audio routing and recording audio. Rosegarden only supports some lesser known Linux plugins, but it doesn't limit you in the number of tracks. It does limit you, however, in only 5 plugins per track. In most cases that's enough. In my general video about DAWs, people gave me a hard time in the comments for not including programs like Audacity and Audition. Why didn't I include those? Well, those are audio editors and not DAWs, even multi-track audio editors. In Audacity you can record your voice or a real-life instrument and apply effects with VST or AU plugins. But you cannot instantiate a VST instrument like Serum, change notes with a piano roll or connecting a MIDI keyboard. And Audacity has no knowledge of BPM. Try to put a sample on the offbeat of a 106 BPM song. Good luck! Yes, you can import a MIDI file, but you cannot play it. So, it's fine for recording a voiceover or a podcast, but not for a music producer. The next DAW is Reaper, but is it free? When I asked the question in my community tab, which free DAW do you know? Someone said the endless, quote-unquote, trial of Reaper. Well, on their website they say it's a 60-day trial. But since the software relies on the system clock to determine the date, yes, you can easily fake it. And indeed, it seems to work past the 60-day period. So, it's also usable in 2037 with a 6,403 days trial. Okay, technically it's not free, but when you click the next screen away, you can use it without limitations. But of course they want you to buy the $60 version or rather the $225 one, depending on your income. Let's look at the looks. The tracks are in the middle. The mixer is on the bottom of the screen and the transport controls are in the middle, just above the mixer. The plugins are added in separate windows and the sample browser, called the Media Explorer, is a bit hidden, but it's there. There is a piano roll in Reaper, but it's in a separate screen with a weird scroll mechanic. Up and down scrolling zooms in and out, and scrolling over the on-screen music keyboard actually scrolls the screen. In Reaper there is no distinction between track types. So a MIDI track, an audio track, a video track and a bass track, those are all the same thing. I have to say I'm surprised by the amount of features and flexibility that Reaper offers. Although they have gone a tad overboard with all the iconless menus and options. This is pretty intimidating for a new user, but a lot of options are pretty self-explanatory when you know the basics of a DAW. Nevertheless, I could pretty much click around in the DAW and get stuff done without watching 10 tutorials. My MIDI keyboard is supported and freezing tracks works smoothly. The sound clip operations are really easy. Extending a clip beyond its limits makes a loop that you can cut and manipulate one part that doesn't affect the other parts. Something that makes the whole looping feature in Logic pretty much useless, because you can't do that and you can better use copy-paste instead, otherwise you are stuck with your loop indefinitely. Dragging a top corner of a clip fades in or out, a huge time saver to get rid of clicks. Some software like Logic uses a ton of cursor tools. The select tool, the cut tool, the trim tool, the fade tool, the are you still not done tool, the hurry up tool, and now it gets annoying tool. No, not here in Reaper. Automation works okay, but it's not my favorite. You have to select the automation lanes, but with some plugins like FabFilter, there is so much you can automate, it fills the entire screen. Exporting can be done in a ton of formats: WAV, AIFF, MP3 and OGG-Vorbis. Sidechaining is possible, but it's a bit complicated. You have to send it via numbered channels instead of selecting a named channel that you want the input from. I'm also surprised by the amount of plugin standards they support. Even ARA is supported, that allows real-time audio file manipulation for example, pitch correcting software like Melodyne. The categorization of plugins is a blessing if you have a ton of plugins. You can search for plugins and even search in categories for plugins. And you can easily stack instrument plugins on top of each other without using an instrument rack or whatever. There is one super feature that I've never seen before: remote. I'm surprised that not more DAW software makers did implement this feature. With remote you can use the processor of another computer in your network for CPU intensive tasks. There are some caveats, however. You need to have plugins on both systems installed. And it needs to be the same version of the plugin, so version 1.5 with version 1.5, and the same standard, so a VST with a VST and an audio unit with an audio unit. You also need a high-speed network connection. Wi-Fi has too much latency. In theory this works. Connecting works smoothly, but I ran into some trouble here and there. For example, changing to non-existing presets on the other machine in Serum caused some problems disconnecting while the application said that it was still connected. But I could see by the amount of CPU usage that my local processor was used. I like the idea, but it needs a little bit more work. Although I'm pretty positive, I do have a few minor complaints. The left and right scrolling is inverted. That is somewhat annoying because every other application on the Mac it works the other way around. The font size is really small and I couldn't find out how to enlarge it. After a day of producing or late in the evening, this is gonna be an issue for me. Also, I don't like the multiple window approach. I would have liked to see a one screen layout. But other than that, Reaper is a solid DAW that is feature rich and definitely competes with the big professional DAWs. Even for $60 you can't complain. And I can see why people are so enthusiastic about this software. Podium is a DAW for Windows that is based on a subscription model of $35 a year with a one-time fee of $50. But there is a free version of Podium. But there are a couple of caveats. First of all, the free version is not updated since 2014. Second, there is no 64-bit support in the free version and you can only use one processor core. In other words, the free version doesn't take maximum advantage of your computer's hardware, and the paid version does. Regretfully, it has no Mac version, so I can't test it for you. It supports VST, MIDI and audio recording, multiple computer monitors and automation. The stock plugins in the software are an equalizer, reverb and pitch plugin. If you took notes, those are only effect plugins, no instrument plugins, so you need to have third-party VST instruments. The next free DAW software on my list is Stagelight. Stagelight by Open Labs is a DAW for Windows and Mac. Stagelight comes in 3 flavors: the free DAW, the platform unlock and the ultimate unlock version, which are respectively $50 or $150. There is an iPhone and an iPad version of the software available. The free version can handle only 2 effect plugins instead of 8. You can't export stems and there is no VST support in the free version. There are basic versions of their instrument plugins in the software, so you are bound to those to make your music. There is also an equalizer, compressor and a delay stock plugin in Stagelight, but you are definitely missing a limiter and a reverb plugin. I couldn't figure out how to sidechain, and judging by the forum it isn't possible at all. This made me quit further exploration of the software. If you can't even do that, it's not worth my time, or even yours for that matter. The DAW is pretty basic, which may be a good thing for a beginner, but if you want to grow with a piece of software, take a look at something else like Reaper. And on top of that, the free version is so handicapped it's hardly usable. I think that browser DAWs are pretty good to start with, but you can't grow with them if you advance. Of the browser DAWs, Bandlab stood out for me. From the offline free DAWs I liked Soundbridge a lot, but my overall winner is definitely Reaper. You may have noticed that there are major downsides to pretty much every free DAW. You don't have that problem with paid DAWs. I made a special video about paid DAWs, check it out right here, or check out my playlist with in-depth looks at some of the software packages I discussed in this video.